In the famous words of Vince Lombardi, what the hell is going on here? Welcome into the voice of college football, and what's going on here is an impromptu live stream call-in show with all of you at 11 o'clock Eastern time. Why not? Let's get to it. 14-team playoff. We've talked about 14 playoffs. Of course, we've got one, a 14 playoff. We've had one for 10 years. We've talked about 16 playoffs for those people that thought 6 teams was good with the top 2 teams getting a bye. We've talked about 8-team playoffs. We've talked about, of course, a 12-team playoff that goes into effect this fall for maybe only 2 years. And we've even talked about 16-team playoffs. Who's talked about 14 teams in the playoffs? Well, while nobody else is talking about 14 teams in the playoffs, the most important people that are relevant to the decision, they are talking about a 14-team playoff starting in 2026. Here we go. Let's get to it. Reported by ESPN and Heather Dinich tonight. The idea of a 14-team college football playoff starting in the 26th season was discussed at CFP meetings in Dallas Wednesday, just months before the start of the first season with a 12-team playoff. CFP Executive Director Bill Hancock acknowledged the idea was discussed, but declined to provide specific details, saying there's work still to be done. I don't really know that there need to be that many specifics to be detailed here. There are only so many ways you could do a 14-team playoff. First of all, so let's understand that. There's basically one 14-team playoff bracket that you can use with 2 byes. Now, who's going to receive those byes? That's is the work that needs to be done, and the revenue distribution. So some of the technicalities beyond just, okay, we're going with 14 teams, and all you have to do is Google 14-team tournament, boop, it'll spit it out. There you go. We're ready to go. With CFP officials pushing to finalize a deal to consummate a television contract for the next 8 years, 3 lingering issues remain unresolved: access, distribution of money, and governance. Is the College Football Playoff Selection Committee going to continue to, if that's what they are determining to be governance, governing, the definition of governance is the act of governing. So if we're talking about the actual execution of the selection of the teams with the College Football Playoff Committee, or if we're talking about who oversees them, those are 2 different questions to be answered. The management committee, which is made up of the commissioners and incoming Notre Dame athletic director Pete Bavacqua. So Jack Swarbrick is the outgoing AD at Notre Dame. I don't know when that transition's taking place, but if Pete Bavacqua is already known as the successor to Swarbrick, then that is pending and imminent. They met Wednesday and discussed potentially expanding the field after the current contract runs out following the 2025 season. And why would they be expanding? Well, first of all, you make more money when you expand the playoff. But secondly, we're going to see this here in just a second, according to ESPN sources. I would think that ESPN would have pretty good sources, considering that they have the television contract and they're here doing the reporting. They would kind of have a connection there, kind of an insider contact there to have pretty reliable sources, pretty direct sources here. The most dominant discussion of a new model revolved around a 14-team playoff, and the CFP leaders left Wednesday's meeting feeling there was momentum. The bump from 12 to 14 teams as opposed to 16 would mostly address the issue of access rather than finances. Officials will still need to discuss how a 14-team playoff would split up automatic qualifiers. This is at the crux of this. For example, could the Big Ten and the SEC get as many as 4 automatic bids? And when it states the SEC and the Big Ten getting 4 automatic bids, I don't know if it's talking about combined. I think it's talking about combined, because to give each league 4 automatic bids, I don't think that's going to happen. That would be 8 automatic out of 14. So that would be 2 automatic from each conference. So that's going to happen anyway. So this is what I'm a bit confused on, because if you read that, it's not clearly stated there. Could the Big Ten and the SEC get as many as 4 automatic bids, meaning each one of them gets 4? Because they're each going to get 2 just by natural selection. They don't need protection of anything under 3, I would think. 3 and under, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have 3 in a 14-team playoff, especially, without needing to have any kind of set stipulations. So is this 4 each for the Big Ten and the SEC? That would be 8. And then the other 3 are automatics from the group of 5, the ACC and the Big 12. That only leaves 3 other spots open that are still open to the SEC and the Big Ten. When the Big Ten and the SEC got together a couple weeks ago and announced this advisory committee that they were forming, this might be their first step right here. And we know that the playoff is now the most important aspect of college football in regards to revenue distribution and revenue generation. There are other pressing issues as well, because really, when you think about it, a playoff should not be difficult to formulate. It should not be difficult to agree on. Again, if there was more equity in the sport, then it would not be difficult, because you would have conference champions, and then you would leave it open to some kind of objective system like the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL to select the playoffs. But we have a sport here where the products on the field are so disparate, and also by connection, either the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken, that the brands and the resources and all of that is so disparate, which created the disparity on the field, or the disparity on the field created the financial and the resource disparity. So this is why we've got to have backdoor dealings in setting up a playoff system, because you've got the haves and the have-nots. Again, in professional sports, it's very understandable. It's equitable. Everyone has a fair shot. Everyone has an equal shot, and it's objective. Even in the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournaments, even though it's not a completely objective system, there is selection. It's a selection made by a committee. There are no buys. There doesn't have to be anything put into the rules of the selection that weights it to say, well, the Big Ten needs to have 6 teams in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, or the ACC or the Big East, because they're the best conferences. This is the only sport that is managed in such a way. And that's not healthy. But I do understand that it is reasonable. There is a reason for it, and that's because of the disparity in the sport, and the disparity is only growing. Everything, of course, boils down to finances. Thank you. The Big Ten and the SEC have made it clear the next contract will be more financially favorable than the current one, meaning we're going to get more money. Either we can do this one of 2 ways. Either you're going to guarantee us more spots, which we're going to get anyway, just by the selection from the committee, or we're going to get a larger distribution. So let's say the SEC and the Big Ten negotiate a contract in which, instead of and my math is going to be off, but instead of the 4 power conferences splitting 100% and 25% each, that doesn't include the group of 5, I know. Instead of that model, there's going to be a disparate revenue distribution system where, let's say, the Big Ten and the SEC each get 30% and the other ones get 22%, or whatever the case might be. Or we're either going to do it that way, or we're going to say, you're going to, even though we know you're going to select us more often, we need to guarantee it. And we're going to guarantee it at a high rate. 4 teams each, guaranteed. So we're going to make our money that way. They say here, where 80% of the money is split evenly among the Power 5 leagues. There you go. So I split them 100%. So 80% goes to the leagues. Okay. Now there's 4 power conferences, and the Big Ten and the SEC have combined 34 teams. So there's also, in addition to just being the most popular, the best, and all of that, that the Big Ten and the SEC can argue, they also can argue we've got the largest conferences, although it's not by that much, because the Big 12 is now 16 as well as the SEC. But they are splitting, in the Big Ten's case, they are splitting the money between more schools. While officials did not dive deep into a financial issue at Wednesday's meeting, and the financial issues at Wednesday's meeting, Hancock said there was, quote, more ground level detailed conversation than we've been able to have. I think everybody rolled up their sleeves and just said, we need to get to work and share what's on our mind, and they all did. There's been a push, especially from the Big Ten, for an increase in automatic qualifiers for the CFP. And this is something that we talked about last week. I posted a video last week when Tony Petitti spoke to ESPN and made this statement, and I took it one way, but I said he's going to propose and push for one of about 3 ways to get this accomplished. And here we go. We know what it is now. Okay, Petitti told ESPN last week, quote, we want fans to think that a game in the second week of November, even if you've already lost 2 or 3 games, still has a lot of value. There's been a push, especially from the Big Ten, for an increase in automatic qualifiers for the CFP. Petitti has made it clear that he values the regular season and believes that increasing automatic qualifier spots could assure that late season games have higher stakes. We talked about this last week because his 2 goals, the way the system works right now, run contradictory to each other. His goals are, on this side, we want more Big Ten teams in the playoff, which every conference wants that, but he is making it a goal. He is making it a priority. We want the most possible Big Ten teams in the playoff. Okay, that's all well and good, and that's understandable. Well, what do you do that? How do you get that accomplished? Well, you get that accomplished by having the best records possible. How do you do that? Well, you have a scheduling system that favors your better teams, your supposed and projected best teams, to not play too difficult a schedule so that they can mount these ridiculous records and make it into the playoff. Because think of this, even though we do talk a conspiracy of brand and television popularity and all of that vying into the committee's decision over the course of this 10-year playoff, listen to this, over the course of the 10-year playoff, excluding what just happened to Florida State this past year, for the first 9 years in selecting 36 teams, although we do think that the SEC got preferential treatment, and maybe the Big Ten started to get that as well, as opposed to what the Pac-12 missed the playoffs in, 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, the Pac-12 missed, 6 or 7 consecutive playoffs. That all seemed to be tied to big brands, TV ratings. We're going to get those big brands and those big conferences in. However, let's understand, the Pac-12 never played itself into the playoff between Washington 2016 and Washington 2023. All their conference champions had at least 2 losses. My point being that during those 9 consecutive years in selecting 36 teams, despite all the conspiracy theories, the committee always selected the Power Five's best records in order every time. Now, there had to be ties that had to be broken because there would be multiple teams tied for 4th place in terms of record status. But if you go year by year, 2014, there was 1 undefeated team, Florida State. They were in. There were 5 one-loss teams, and 3 were selected. The other 2 were left out. And we could go through each season and see where the committee always took the best records. They never jumped a 10-2 team over an 11-1 team to get them into the playoff, or an 11-1 over a 12-0. Never. They always selected just the best records, except for this past year with Florida State. We can argue that outcome and why that took place. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. Florida State was playing with a 2nd and 3rd string quarterback. Okay. Oh, back to my point about Petiti and what he had to say. So his 2 ideals are running contradictory to each other in the current system, because he wants the most teams in the playoffs, but he also wants the best games in November. So how do you produce the best games? You produce the best games by having your best brands play each other a lot. So you don't protect Ohio State and say, well, we're going to have them play Michigan and USC, but they're going to miss Washington, Oregon, Penn State, or miss 3 of the top 5 that we anticipate being. And we'll do the same thing with Michigan. We'll do the same thing with USC. So we'll only give them, let's say, 2 difficult games out of what we expect to be the 5 or 6 best. Well, that doesn't produce the best games. But if you schedule the best games against the best brands and the toughest teams, well, they're going to notch losses. There are going to be more losses tacked onto their record. And if the CFP committee approaches the selection the way they have for 10 years, then the Big Ten, this being the example, because Tony Petiti said this, will get less teams in. So how does he accomplish both of these objectives? Great games in November, big brands playing each other, and then also get the most teams in the playoff. How does he do that? He negotiates to get a minimum number of qualifying teams. 4. Let's get 4 for my conference. And then I can have all the Ohio State, USC, Penn State, Washington, Michigan, Oregon games that I can stack up. And we automatically have 4 teams in regardless. So my 9-3 team is going to get in because we've got 4 spots. That's how he's going to get it accomplished. A 14-team playoff would likely mean that the highest-ranked conference champions end up with a bye. So this is how it works out. You've got 14 teams, so you give byes to the 2 top teams. And how is that determined? Well, the 2 top teams are selected by the College Football Playoff Committee. They're 2 highest-ranked teams, unless they're from the same conference. They're 2 highest conference champions get byes. So the other 12 teams, so there is no longer byes for all the conference champions. There's only byes for the 2 top conference champions. And would anyone want to wager a guess as to most likely who those top 2 conference champions are going to be? And so no longer 4 conference champions getting in, And this is probably also a negotiating tactic from Petiti and Sankey, who said, hey, wait a minute, let's go from year to year and let's determine, based on recent history and based on the realignment of these conferences, what the records are going to look like and who's going to be receiving these conference championship buys. Of course, we can't do a perfect correlation between what would have happened last season had the conferences been realigned as they are in 2024. But let's look at the Big 12 from last season. Take out Texas, take out Oklahoma, input the 4 teams from the Pac-12. Most likely your conference championship game would have been Oklahoma State and Kansas State, Oklahoma State and Utah. Utah went 8-4. Kansas State went 8-4. Oklahoma State went 9-3. I know those aren't conference records, but you get the gist. They would have had 2 teams in the conference championship game with much lesser records, not sterling, glowing, glittering 12-0, 11-1 records. Therefore, the conference champion in the Big 12, outside of Texas, taking Texas out, would have probably been 10-3. And they're going to get a bye. I don't have an issue with that. But certainly the Big Ten and the SEC apparently do. And most specifically, it looks as though the Big Ten has an issue with that. Handing a bye to inferior teams with generally 10-3 records as conference champions. So let's throw those lesser champions back into the pool to have to play among these 12. So no longer is there going to be an advantage for a Big 12 champion over a second, third, fourth place team from the SEC or the Big 10. They're going to be in that same 12-team bracket. And so I looked at last year. And as soon as I looked at last year, when I saw that this story came out, I called our graphics department, and I got a late request in for them to work on this. And so this is what we got. So basically, that's what a 14-team playoff looks like based on last year's results. You've got Michigan's the 1 seed, Washington is the 2 seed, and they get buys. Texas is the 3. They play Liberty, the 14. So they're the group of 5 representative. Texas there in the 3 spot. And that's how you set up a 14-team bracket. On one side, you drop the highest seed is Texas, the 3, and then there's the 4 playing the 13. And you NCAA basketball fans will recognize all of this, except for there is no 1 or 2 seed. There's the 8, 9, and there's the 7, 10. Now, in this particular year, it's kind of works out in a strange way, and I don't know if the committee would do something about this. They should. You would have 3 rematches in the first round. It just so happens to come out this way from 2023. Georgia and Ole Miss, they played the regular season. They would play in the first round of the playoff. Ohio State and Penn State would play in the first round of the playoff. And now with this 14-team field, we now have LSU in the playoff, and they would play Bama. 3 rematches in the first round. I don't think people want to see that. Now, it's one thing when teams earn their way into a rematch situation, but I think that they would switch it around. Have Ohio State play Ole Miss and Georgia play Penn State. I guess you'd have to mix it up a little bit more than that. But anyway, you would mix it up where, let's say, Ohio State plays LSU and Bama plays Penn State and so forth. Okay. But that's what you do. There's your 14-team bracket, and then you got Michigan and you've got Washington, and you save them so they don't have to play the first round. So there they are. So Michigan, let's go with chalk here. Michigan, the 1, plays Oregon, who defeated Mizzou. So that's the 1-8 game. And then down here, you've got the 2-7 game as Ohio State wins in the first round. They've got to play Washington in the second round. Then the other 12 teams play. They played that first round to get us down to 6. And then those 6 with the 2 that received byes make an 8-team playoff. There you have it. Anything else from here? We've got... Okay. ESPN reported earlier this month that Petitti discussed bigger formats for the CFP in a meeting this fall, according to sources. The reasoning is simple math. His league will have 18 teams starting next season. The SEC will have 16. Well, the Big 12 has 16 as well. Today included lengthy and in-depth discussions about the future of the CFP 2026 and beyond, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips told ESPN. Overall, it was a full day of candid conversations. Wouldn't you just love to be a fly on the wall? I've always said that there are 2 places I would love to be a fly on the wall in sports. One is an NFL draft room. I would love to be in the war room during the NFL draft. And the other is I would love to be in the office of the interview conversation for major college football coaches. I would love to hear the interview process. Those are the 2 places I would like to be. Now, the third would be in the boardroom of the CFP and the negotiations that go on between the management committee and these conference commissioners, especially when you've got 10 conference commissioners. So this, although this is a power 2 now and a power 4, all 10 conference commissioners are involved in this process. Can you imagine being the MAC commissioner? What does he say? What does he have to say? Oh, I've got a suggestion. Why don't we expand this to 64? We might get a team in. So there you have it. There you have it. Left the link in the chat. We also left the link in the description section of the video if you want to give me a call. Otherwise, I'm going to go through comments. John D'Adamo. Hit that Amazon link on the Voice of College Football videos. Yes, I cannot emphasize this enough. You shop on Amazon. If you don't shop on Amazon, I am in no way encouraging you to do so. But if you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. It helps grow and build the channel. It does not cost you a penny. You take that link and it's used just in the same way that you use the link that you currently use. Look at this. We got TF showing up. Smash that thumbs up. TF, yo, 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 yo. Thank you. Appreciate you. Okay, here we go. Dave Valensky, who says, just make an even 16 and get it over with. You're thinking too logically, Dave. Thinking too logically. No, these commissioners have an angle to this. We didn't hear anything about Sankey's angle on this, but it's got to be similar to Tony Petitti. Basically, the deal is we can expand the playoff. We will be the most likely candidate to benefit from that expansion, getting more at-large bids, but let's do it in such a way where we also protect our conference champion, not with the schlups from the ACC and the Big 12, where, sure, Ohio State and Alabama get their buys, but so did Arizona and Florida State. But no, only 2 buys now. Let's go to 14 teams. Go to 14, and this is the best of both worlds. We go to 14, and we have 2 more spots to get teams in. Plus, we are the only 2 that get buys. Brilliant. We've got Sean who says, Mark, do you ever find time for sleep? I think about that every day when my alarm clock off at not some ungodly, ridiculous hour like 5:30 in the morning, but at 8 o'clock. I set my alarm for 8 o'clock to force myself out of bed because it is hard for me to go to bed before 2:30 or 3. It is just extremely difficult for me to do that before 2:30 or 3. I get wound up and I get going late at night. But I believe that there was a reason that God brought the sun up at a particular time in the day and then set it. He's telling us, go to bed, get up. But I've never been able to, and I will blame my employer for 19 years for part of that had me working until most of the time working till 4 in the morning. All right. Thank you for that, Sean. I'll appreciate that. I will sleep a little bit better with $10 or the converted rate of YouTube, $6.50, let's say, with that. Thank you so much for the contribution. Let's take a call in here from our guy, David Greenfield.
Yes, to the great Mark Rogers, 2026, the year of the expanded playoff and the year that the team up north will be looking for a new coach.
26,
I think both
giving
will
Sharon 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, I don't think Rich Rod Part 2 is going to get that much more time. After three straight losses to the Buckeyes, he'll be on his way out the door. So they'll go back to their, 8-4 and loserville ways. Yeah, 24, 25. I'll give him to the end of 26, Mark. They'll keep him around for that long, So once they go back to those ways, he'll be on his way. Maybe they'll find Fred Flintstone Part 2. I mean, Brady Hoke somewhere to take his job.
Was that a nickname for Brady Hoke?
Oh, by the way, have you ever seen the resemblance? It's uncanny. Do a side by side of Brady Hoke and Fred Flintstone. That's a good comp, by the way.
Oh, there have been times in my life when I've watched as much Flintstones as I have college football, but when I was like 6, but still watched a lot of Flintstones in my life. So I got you on that one. Okay.
Yabba dabba do. Yeah, I'll say this though, Mark. I mean, this is obviously college football is just trying to. I mean, this is continuing to try to build up the interest in the sport. And I mean, I hear you about the haves and the have-nots in the sport. Like the MAC. If you're a MAC team, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Or some of these lower tier. I mean, but in pre-BCS era, what was their achievement though? Was at least going to a bowl game. That's. I mean, everybody. There's levels to this, Mark. We just have to understand there's levels to this. And the bottom line is if you're in a lower tier conference, going to a bowl game was like an achievement. I mean, Mark, we're, proud. Well, you graduated Kent State. I was there for a quick cup of coffee. But I mean, what's a good year at Kent State? I mean, you could classify that. I mean, that year that Darrell Hazel had, where they went to a bowl game, had a nice year. I mean, if you look at it statistically for them, that's one of their better years. So you kind of have to look at where your goals are as a program. I mean, DeReal is, and TTUN fans get on him, but he's realistic about the expectations of Kentucky football, and where they can be and, as far as achievements over the course of a season. So, I mean, I still think that's out there. I mean, I heard Kevin say on Buckeye Talk, I think certain programs are resided to the fact that, they're not going to, contend for or win a national championship.
I don't know how much of my spiel that you heard, David, but I went on and on for quite a long time. Let's see. I gave this thing a good 35 minutes of me talking about this. So here's the overriding point. Is that college football is unlike any other sport where, of course, in the professional leagues, you just have an objective system. Everybody knows what the deal is. There is no selection process. It's an objective system. In men's and women's basketball, and probably in the other sports as well, college baseball and the other sports, there's a selection process, but it's not made in such a way where they have to have these weights and balances to determine and give favor to certain brands and conferences because they want to weight the system and they want to please them and all of that. They are building a system here where they're going to have a uh, disparate distribution of the revenue. They're
Hmm.
talking about having uneven amounts of automatic qualifiers for certain leagues. It's just unlike any other sport where there's just a disparity of resources and therefore talent, therefore levels of play on the field that you have to game the playoff to represent that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I mean, once you open the door on the 14 playoff, I think we all kind of knew it would last, but it was like a Band-Aid. It wasn't a long-term fix. I mean, did you think when they put the 14 playoff out there that it was going to stay 4 teams for a prolonged period of time? Because I didn't. I mean,
Well, I
if
was
we would have
hoping not.
had this, yeah, I mean, if we'd have had this discussion in 2013, 2014, I'd have been one of the first to tell you that, a few years later, this thing's going to have to expand. They're going to have no choice.
Well, I was thinking it was going to expand for two basic reasons. Number one is because the original thought of 4 teams with 5 conferences doesn't make any sense. So there are going to
Right.
be so many controversies and arguments that they're going to have to expand it. But then also, everything in sports just automatically, if you're making money, then you continue to do more of the same to make that money grow even more. So what has happened with has any professional sport or collegiate sport ever reduced its playoff field?
No,
No,
no, no.
it's never
It's
happened.
right. Yeah, it's all. I mean, the NFL expanded it. I mean, I was debatable. I mean, I when they went to 7, I was okay. I mean, I was lukewarm on the idea. I didn't necessarily think it was the best, but some people were probably against it in 90, going to from 5 to 6 because remember it expanded at one time before. Although that's way off.
A few
You
times
know,
before.
y- right. So
78.
right. But the changes of college football. I mean, some of them I like, some of them I don't like. I mean, basically, I mean, we've been round and round about NIL. I think that the transfer portal has its pros, has its cons. I actually think it's probably got maybe a little bit more pro than con. The 12-team playoff overall, I think expanding the playoff isn't a bad idea. But as we've said numerous times, I still say that 8 teams is the perfect number and has always been the perfect number. And I don't know, was the committee ever asked why they chose 12 over 8? I mean, I don't.
That's a great question. I don't know that they were ever posed that question. I think it's mostly about money that they
Yeah.
bypassed 8.
Yeah, I mean, they're not gonna just come out and say the not so quiet part out loud. This is just about us, about the dollars. I mean, they're gonna put it in terms of, well, this would be more advantageous for interest or the fans or whatever to make it sound all good.
I would argue that there have been only 2 positives that I can think of, only 2 positives of any of this playoff era, starting all the way even to just 4 teams. And that is number one, watching really good football teams play each other.
Hmm.
So we get to see more really good football teams play each other, both because of realignment and because of this expanded playoff. And number two, I never thought it was fair to leave a conference out, if not 2 conferences out of the playoff, and that there was too difficult a decision to be made by the playoff committee in selecting the 4 seed versus who's 5 and who's 6. That was always for me an argument point most seasons So that no longer is an issue. There are plenty of teams in the field. If you don't make this field, then forget it. You've got nothing to argue about. Every conference is in. But every other byproduct of this era of college football, to me, has been to its detriment. The bowl games have completely lost their value. We have conference championship games that have lost their value. We have rivalries that will now even more so lose their value. We have conferences that don't make any sense. We have conferences that are so large that there are teams that don't play each other for 5, 6, 7. Well, they've kind of gamed that system, but you don't play,
Right.
for example, in the Big Ten. These teams this season won't play 8 teams in the Big Ten.
Well,
And I
I
could go
do
on
think.
and on. It's all negative.
Well, I do think that the changing landscape of the sport is going to lend us to more interesting regular season matchups, though, Mark. I know we've talked about
Well,
that
that's what I
before.
just said. Yeah, better
Yeah,
games.
yeah,
And
which is a net positive.
yes, it is.
Yeah.
I will enjoy watching Penn State play USC and Michigan play Oregon and all those other
Hmm.
matchups, Oklahoma playing Alabama, etc. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me ask you. Let me put it this way. And I know we've kind of been round and round about this, but I've never asked you just directly. Bottom line, is Mark Rogers more of a college football fan than he is today than he was, let's say, in the early to mid 90s?
Oh, no, no, no. Not even close.
I already probably knew the answer to that, but I mean, I just had to kind of say it, you know.
And I'm a huge college football fan still today. Of course, I should be.
Right.
Uh, but no, my heart's not anywhere close to being as invested.
And that reasoning would be because of the changes that have been made to the sport, correct? Just bottom line?
Well, there's no reasoning involved.
Okay.
It's all heart related.
Okay.
I'm not doing any reasoning. That's like, uh, well, you're a purist when it comes to rooting for the home team. You're a Browns fan. You're an Indians
Yep.
fan, Guardians fan,
Right.
on down the line. Buckeyes
Yep.
fan. I assume a Cavaliers fan.
Yep. You got
Yeah.
it.
So you're right down the line. Now, when I was growing up, I was a Cowboys fan living in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, I found that was that just because you liked Landry as a coach, or did it was you
I
know?
was I was 8 or 9 years old. They were on
Okay.
TV, they looked good, they had the shiny helmets. I don't know why I started liking them. That's my point. You don't make if you're if you're a sports fan, at least the way I'm a sports fan, and even though I have this reputation, it seems to be so cerebral and analytical and all that, but it all comes down to a heart condition. I was a Cowboys fan, not because I like decided, okay, I want to be a bandwagon Cowboys fan because they win all the time. No, my heart just led me in that. I was an Indians fan. They were losing 100 games a year. So I obviously was not needing to root for the best teams. Um, and when the Browns came back, that was the only mental cognitive decision I made to root for a team. That when the Browns went away in 95 and then they came back in 99, I thought, you know what? I'm a diehard Indians fan, Buckeyes fan, Cavs fan. I should be a Browns fan. I gave up on the Cowboys a long time ago. I'm going to be a Browns fan. But you know what happened, David? I never
Yeah.
truly became a Browns fan because my heart wasn't in it.
Well, I mean, if your heart was being a Browns fan from '99 on, Mark, it would have gotten broken. I don't know, and disappointed how many times over. I got to tell you that much.
Well,
You
I
know,
don't
with all
know
the
if,
losing seasons.
well, does your heart get broken more by rooting for such just an abysmal franchise, or does it get broken more in the 1980s when you're losing AFC championship games?
Yeah, and well, I'll always take my team knowing that they were in it or they've got a chance because
Yep.
you know going into a season to have some optimism. You know what I mean? There's a lot of seasons in the 2000s I went in with no optimism with the Cleveland Browns, and it was well founded.
And that is one reason why I love being an Ohio State football fan. And I
Yeah,
don't care what anyone says about national championships. I think they're overrated. Not that I don't want one every year,
sure.
but who has been more consistently a contender for national championships than Ohio State? No one.
No, I totally agree. Well, and your argument about national championships is really the BCS is what brought us the national championship being more in vogue. Because if we would have had this conversation, let's say in 93 or something, about national championships, they weren't thought of as much until you got a defined championship game
Yeah,
to, decide it. Because we grew up at a time whenever it was all about just winning the conference and going out to Pasadena. I mean, that was generally thought of as a very good year, or almost a
sure.
great year if you're a Big Ten fan.
Well, I would have to go back and see myself as a 12-year-old watching on New Year's Day because you're right. I was satisfied with an Ohio State Big Ten championship going to the Rose Bowl. Absolutely. That was a great season.
Right.
However, I was watching Miami play Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, knowing that the winner of this game is going to win the national championship. I did
Y-
was cognizant of that every New Year's Day watching those games.
Well, but you ran into a boatload of years, Mark, and you did a bunch of shows on them on where it was always very subjective in the 80s and the 90s, when you could have made a lot of cases for a lot of different teams. And, some would say that, people got upset about that. And that's what led to a BCS, I think, because remember how many years we would talk that it led to these conversations on sports talk shows during that time frame of, well, they didn't deserve it, they lost to them, or I think on a neutral field this team would beat them. And it got so the conversation got so much out there into the public that there was a groundswell of support to have a definitive championship game, which led us to the BCS. Of course, dollars drives everything, but there was a real, people were tired of just sports writers crowning national champions for a prolonged period of time.
Right, right, and right. Every way, you are right.
So, yeah, I mean, I just think I look at the overall health of the sport, though, kind of like you do. I mean, you have to look at the overall health of the sport. I'm always going to root for my team, of course. That's my favorite team. But I'm looking at the overall health of the sport. And bottom line, are the changes that we're making better for the overall health of this sport long term? And I think that's the question. You want the question? There's your question to the voice of college football, I ask.
Well, I I think that if you take the playoff in and of itself, that's very debatable. But for those of us who, it's kind of ironic that everything that you just sized up, I completely agree with. And I was a person that in 1984 wrote a paper in school setting up a 16 team college football playoff. So I wanted a playoff about as early as anybody out there. And so I got what I wished for, what I wanted. But I guess it's tough for me to detach this change from all the other changes that I think are not good for the sport. NIL, transfer portal, good for the individual. I'm in favor of them, but they're
Yeah.
not good for the sport. And this just seems to go along with all of that as well. And I don't
Yeah.
like the bowl season being torn to shreds. I don't like it.
I, I'm with you on a lot of it, Mark. Um, I know a lot of college fans. Although I think it's possible to like college football and the NFL. I know a lot of those people. Although I hear a lot of college football fans that diss the NFL, but you know what? At least in the NFL, there's a structure for all this kind of stuff. There's a structure for players to get paid. There's a structure for their free agency. Now obviously you have a lot less teams, so you can cater a playoff system a lot easier in a 30-some team leagues as juxtaposed to how many teams we have in Division 1A college football when you have 100 and some odd teams. So, but that's what leads us to this.
Yeah, a lot of the issues that college football wrestles with is not college football's fault. It's just inherent to the sport,
Yeah.
meaning there are 133 teams, and even within the Power Five, 65 to 70 teams, uh, disparaging amounts of talent, resources, and all those things. And college football can't do anything about that.
Yeah, that's why I go back to there are levels to this, Mark. That's why the certain levels are 8-4 in whatever bowl game you can get to, or have the best record you can possibly have and get to the best possible. But you're right. Now the bowl games are torn to shreds. I was going to say with the seeding thing, Mark, I didn't hear your show the other night. I still think that that's, off too, by the way, about how, a certain conference winner can get a seed over maybe a more deserved Big Ten or SEC team who ends up with a better record, maybe even having played a tougher schedule and a tougher conference. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm going to, I believe, be in the minority and say I have no issue with that.
Oh, okay.
Because who determined who's in the Big Ten and the SEC? Who determined to
Well,
make those conferences better?
obviously the conferences did. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
the Big Ten could have invited Oklahoma State and Kansas State and Iowa State to be in the Big Ten, right? They
sure,
could have.
sure. I mean, well,
Seems
they were looking
ridiculous.
at
I know what I'm proposing is ridiculous, but they made their conferences as difficult as they are.
right. Well, I mean, they also were looking at the programs that were going to drive the revenue.
Oh, of course, of course. What I'm proposing is not realistic. I get that, but I'm just stating that they want both. I like the tension, let's say the healthy tension of the playoff is going to be slanted toward these dominant, what we expect to be these two dominant conferences. So they're going to get the most at large bids and et cetera, et cetera. But they're also, as long as we don't get this 14 team deal, while it's still 12, there's a
Mhm.
tension between that viewpoint and the tension between let's make conference championships equal, somewhat equal in that you receive a bye, you get a top 4 seed. I like that tension. I think it works.
Well,
That I
but
think that's
as
one
well
of the
as I do,
small
not
things
all
that works.
as well as I do, not all conferences are created equal. Now, the SEC's been saying that for 800 years, obviously. But I mean, you get what I'm saying, though. I mean, but you're also, Mark, and I'm going to kind of go to an area that you reinforce all the time, Mark, which is who do you play and who do you beat? I mean, if you are a second place SEC or Big Ten team that finishes with a really good record, that runs through a very tough schedule, played a lot of tough teams, has a few really good wins, as opposed to a conference winner that maybe doesn't have that schedule, doesn't have those quality wins, Mark, how do you?
You let the conference champion get the bye. What does the NFL do every year? We see teams that are wild card teams with better records have to play on the road against division champions that have
Well,
worse
at my
records.
at my risk of trying to do a Chris here and catch you in a whatever situation, Mark, you do you have always seemed to be a person though that has put more of an emphasis on in the Mark Rogers top 25 that makes sense. Put your emphasis on who you played and who you beat.
Oh, that
And
those are two different things. Me
okay,
ranking teams versus what I think is equitable and what's fair.
okay,
Those are two different things.
okay. So you would separate the seeding for the playoff from okay,
My top 25 is a resume ranking, and this is we have conferences. You should be given some level of credit and have earned something for winning a conference. I don't care what conference it is. Otherwise, why do we have conferences?
yeah. No,
Why,
I,
why
I,
should any of the why should any of the conference champions be an automatic?
Well, I mean, you could see where I was coming from. I was just thinking that you were going to apply the same thing you did in putting together your list of highly ranked teams within, seeding of the teams for the playoff.
Think about this, David. We could have 9-4 teams win conference championships, just like we
Right.
almost did last year with Oklahoma State. Okay,
Hmm.
9-4 team in a 12-team field, aside from being a conference champion, would not make the playoff. Why not just if we don't recognize conference champions, why don't we not recognize them at all, and we could leave some conference champions, even in the Power Four, out of the playoff.
I mean, I hear you. I mean,
If I'm taking your approach to the extreme, then why make any conference champions automatic qualifiers?
yeah. I mean, I do think that the conference champions should be able to make the playoff, and I think in a 12-team format, I think you'd still find ways to get them seeded. My question is do they deserve precedent over a team that happened to finish second, let's say like an LSU or Penn State that's out of the Big Ten or the SEC that runs through a really tough schedule and has these quality wins and through merit may have earned the 3 seed or the 4 seed even or whatever.
Oh,
Yeah,
I get your point, but I still think that the conference champions should be recognized.
okay, okay.
I don't
The
care
risk
what their records are.
or who they played or who they beat.
No, because that can be cleaned up as well. These teams should not be scheduling their own games.
Well, yeah, in a way that the schedule's always built into the cake because of the conference they play in is already going to cater to tough games.
Well, 75% of it is.
Yeah, I mean, whether you now being in the SEC the way it's constituted or the Big Ten is the way it's constituted currently.
But again, the SEC and the Big Ten decided what teams they wanted to add to their conferences.
Right. I mean, conversely, they could have taken lesser tier programs to get easier wins as juxtaposed to taking better programs to get, to have more difficult football games.
That's it, David. Anything else?
That's all I've got for the evening, Mark. As usual, good show. And interested to see if this actually comes to fruition in 2026. By the way, did I hear correctly? ESPN has the contract again for the playoff?
ESPN, we're hearing differing things here because a couple of days ago it was announced that ESPN extended the contract, that they won the extension of the contract through 2031. Then it was just announced today that that is not necessarily the case. If you read the last ESPN article that came out, I don't remember the wording, but that isn't quite a done deal for sure.
Well, I was just hoping that my guys Klatt, my guy Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson get to do a few games. They've I don't know, they might have surpassed Herbie and Fowler for me.
Yeah, I don't think either one of those teams is the best in college football.
Oh, who's your best duo, Mark?
Well, I think there are several.
What, McDonough and Greg McElroy?
Yeah, I would take those two. Like, I think Klatt's great. Herb Street has lost a little credibility with me, but I still think he's extremely good. And Klatt is arguably the best at what he does, but his partner weighs him down considerably. I don't
Oh,
know if I would watch a national championship game with the sound up uh,
oh man. Are
under
you
that.
dissing on the Johnson isms? You don't like his is it the nicknames, Mark, that bother you?
Do I take the classy high road or do I tell you what I really think right now? I may use terms like a clown, so forth.
Oh, come on,
Have
Mark.
you
He's
ever
just
heard
trying to
John
liven
Sterling
things
call a
up.
baseball game?
What's that?
Have you ever heard John Sterling of the New York Yankees call a baseball game?
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, that he's Gus Johnson. Gus Johnson is him. They're the same guy. They're more concerned about thinking up clever little nicknames that like a fifth grader could think of than actually credibly calling the game. Like Gus Johnson, I don't know how many times because Corey Brad and I have had a back and forth about Gus Johnson. And if Gus Johnson would ever watch this or anything, I wouldn't like that. Not that I would care or be a coward that I would not want him to hear this, but I hear he's a really nice guy,
Yeah,
that
it
he's a
seems like it.
great human being. So I'm separating that he might be a tremendous human being to that I can't really consider him one of the better or even a marginal play-by-play announcer.
Hey, don't discuss too much. It's going to hurt your chances of getting his partner on your program, Mark. And we're all dying for you to do the Mark Rogers Joel Klatt one-on-one, which I would be must-watch TV. By the way.
See, you caught me at midnight when I'm a little more loose-tongued, I guess, because I've held back on Gus Johnson in the past. I've made that known a few times, but I usually hold back because I don't like to criticize credible people, and he's a professional in certain ways and everything. But again, I was about to say that Corey Brada would tell you that we've gone back and forth about Gus Johnson a few times to the point where almost every Saturday, I'm almost always watching the Gus Johnson game because it's the best Big Ten game. And like there were times this season where I would DM Corey and say, we're only 3 minutes into this game and Gus Johnson has already screwed 3 things up.
Wow.
He's constantly making horrible mistakes.
Is it almost as bad as like Keith Jackson at the end there, those last few years when he was kind of lost his fastball?
I would take Keith Jackson any day of his life.
No, prime Keith
I'm not
Jackson was
seeing the
great.
comparison.
Prime Keith Jackson was great, but you watch the last couple years of Keith Jackson, he was starting to lose his fastball.
Well,
a little
I
bit,
know
Mark.
that he wasn't in his prime, but I don't remember Keith Jackson not being good. Dick Enberg had a rough end of his career. He comes to mind. And
Yeah,
Dick
it
Enberg
was
was exceptional.
because he was great in his prime.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, my friend. Always a good show, Mark. You take care of yourself.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yes, nobody send this show on to Gus Johnson because, again, I hear that he's a great guy. All right. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We got Will here. And before you start, I just want to mention that Cruise Life, FSU, Shine, and Dave E. Unfortunately, it looks like you're trying to get through, but you can't. So just want to let you know that I acknowledge that I appreciate you're trying to get through, but for whatever you can't connect. All right, Will. It's all yours.
Well, before I get into what I was going to talk about, I don't know, man. For me, Tom Hammond and Brent Musburger, they're my favorites growing up. They're so great.
Well, I can understand the first why you would choose him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess he was a bit of a homer, but I felt like he called the game really well too.
Well, I don't know that he's a homer. I just know that he was doing the Notre Dame game for a long time. Now, I became acquainted with Tom Hammond way before that when he was doing all sorts of baseball and I don't know what else he was doing. He did NFL games for a long time too.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And then those Musburger, Herb Street, that was a great duo for a while.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I watched your playoff video, of course.
Yeah.
And you're digging at Notre Dame for not being in a conference.
I am not digging at Notre Dame. I'm just saying they are reaping the harvest of their decision.
All right. So I'm going to have to make a little argument that it doesn't really hurt Notre Dame. So if they go 12-0, they'd be the 5 seed. They play against a group of 5, whoever the heck comes out of the group of 5 at home. So Notre Dame having that instead of a conference championship, I think benefits the Irish. I know they don't have the long rest, but I think that's a bit easier than playing a conference championship.
Yeah, not playing a conference championship game, but then playing a first-round game in South Bend against Liberty or Tulane. Yeah.
And if they would win that, they would play probably the Big 12 or ACC champion the next round.
Yeah, the 4 seed. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we lost Will. Hopefully, Will will come back. Now, we got you back, Will. Here we go. There you are.
And then they would eventually have to do the SEC Big Ten champion. So I just think it benefits the Irish not having to play the SEC or Big Ten in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, and I'm sure they've
Go
obviously
12
thought
now.
that through and see
Mhm.
that it's not that big a deal. So I'm not arguing that, oh, they got to take a number 5 seed. This is really going to hurt them. I'm just saying for anybody out there that is saying, why doesn't Notre Dame get a top 4 seed, or what's going to happen if
Mhm.
Notre Dame's undefeated or 11-1, and they should be, they could be ranked number 1 in the country and be the 5 seed.
Mhm. I mean,
That
yeah.
would be kind of strange. Now, here we got the 14 team that was announced tonight as a possibility. And in this situation, they could be, well, I guess they would be still a 5 seed. And then they would play the 4. Okay. Yeah. It's basically the same deal.
Mhm. I mean, I just don't think it's like. I mean, obviously, it would be nice in some ways to have the bye, but I don't think the situation that. Oh, of course, Roger's saying that the USC is going to be the Big Ten champ, but yeah, I mean, I just don't. I think it. I mean, obviously, it's different than just being the 1 seed, but I feel like being the 5 seed isn't the worst situation to be in.
No, and as Clint says here, if Notre Dame is ranked number 1, we'll cross that bridge when it comes.
All right, Clint.
When is the last time? Well, I
2012 was the last time they're ranked
yeah.
number 1.
As soon as that came out of my mouth, I knew what the answer was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be so. I have a question. The first round games, I guess, aren't going to be called bowl games. They'll just be first round playoff games because they're at the home site.
Oh, you're getting to a topic here that really aggravates me.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them should be called bowl games.
Mm-hmm. I guess
Who
they'll just call them
cares?
playoff games. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, do we, if Florida State, like the way I drew up this 14-team playoff, let's say the Rose Bowl was one of the semifinal games, and it was Florida State and Alabama. Like, it's a playoff game. It's being played at the Rose Bowl. So the Rose Bowl, unlike the Sugar Bowl, at least still has a stadium named the Rose Bowl. So they're playing in that stadium, but they play in that stadium 15 times a year, and we don't call it the Rose Bowl. So, yes. I can't even keep track of these New Year's 6 games anymore and these playoff games. I don't even know. I know once they're announced, or even earlier in the season before we get the matchups, but people know, okay, the Peach Bowl is the semifinal and the Fiesta Bowl is the semifinal. People will bring that up to me all season. I'll be like, I don't even know who's in.
I mean, the only times the Rose Bowl was the
cares?
Rose Bowl was I know the last time was that Oregon-Wisconsin game. That was a Rose Bowl, and then Washington-Ohio State. What was that even?
Okay, so if you're, excuse me, Will, if you're referring to the video, where I talked about that, if you were talking about during the 10 years of the playoff, the 14 playoff, Big Ten champion, Pac-12 champion, folks in the chat, here's a trivia question. How many times during the 10 years of the 4-team college football playoff did the Big Ten champion and the Pac-12 champion play in the Rose Bowl? How many times in 10 years? Does anybody have a guess? Pac-12 champion, Big Ten champion. Buck says once. Buck would be correct. One time.
I mean, I guess Wisconsin wasn't the champion. So
they weren't.
Yeah.
One time in 10 years. So to me, it ceased being the Rose Bowl a long time ago.
Yeah.
The Sugar Bowl And then they had in the article that was published yesterday talking about the 5+7, they noted that, for example, if Georgia was in the Fiesta Bowl, let's say Georgia and Oregon are in the Fiesta Bowl, and Ohio State and Clemson are in the Sugar Bowl, that they could flip-flop them to keep the tradition of Georgia in the SEC playing in the Sugar Bowl. How stupid. Just because once every 12 years you can keep a little bit of tradition, you're going to like, oh, that's just pointless.
I mean, I guess the Fiesta Bowl is like there wasn't really a tradition with that one.
No.
But yeah.
No, there was not.
Yeah. Well,
anything else on your mind, Will?
Yeah, that's about it. I just want to talk about Notre Dame and the playoff. But
all right, Will. Sounds good.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm working on my top 25, my pre-spring top 25. You entered my mind today as I was looking at Notre Dame.
Someone had us at 5 from ESPN, so I'm just curious if you'll have us that high. That'll be interesting.
Sounds familiar. That number sounds familiar.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Very good, Will. We'll see you. We had Dave pop up here for just a second, and hopefully Dave can get through. Yes. Ohio State number 1. Maybe. Dave, who is back first? Oh, my goodness. Don't know who John's having a conversation with about proper tackling. B-Bean, Mark, what is the solution? Cancel the bowl system? So, how many of you agree with me that playing playoff games, playing bowl games within the playoff system doesn't serve any purpose at all? And if you disagree, it's not like I think that there is some right or wrong here. I think it's just complete preference. And to me, these bowl games completely lose the identity of what they are and what they were supposed to be, and the traditions that are attached to them, and the conference affiliations, and all of that is completely lost when it's a playoff game that aren't even played in the same stadiums. The Cotton Bowl is not used anymore. The Orange Bowl is not used anymore. It's a playoff game. It's the first round playoff games on campus, then the second round playoff games, and the semifinals and the championship game. Just because they call it the Orange Bowl and it's played at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, to me, it's no longer the Orange Bowl with Oregon playing Utah in the Orange Bowl. Yeah. But I don't have an answer for you, B-Bean, because even though I think it's been corrupted and destroyed, I don't have a cure for it within this system. The only cure that I have would be that there will be bowl games outside of the playoff. And the playoff is obviously going to utilize the best bowls, the biggest bowls. So there are going to be 4 games on campus, looking at the 12 team, 4 games on campus and a championship game. So if I've got this straight, there are going to be 11 games in the 12-team playoff. So they're going to need 6 bowl games. There's your New Year's 6. Those are going to be used every year in probably a different order. The semifinals one year will be the Rose Bowl and the Cotton Bowl, and the next year it'll be the Peach Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, and then the other bowls will be used for those second round games. And so then what is the best bowl game outside the New Year's 6? What are the better bowl games? The Alamo Bowl, the Holiday Bowl, the Citrus Bowl, the Capital One Bowl. That's the same. Citrus Capital One Bowl. What used to be the Outback Bowl. Those are the best. The Gator Bowl. Those are the best non-playoff games. So we're still going to have those. And they're going to be even less valuable, less palatable. They're going to be even more clownish and made fun of now going forward. Because there's going to be 12 teams in the playoff. And so you're going to be the 13th best team in the country, which is really not going to be the 13th best. They'll really be the 12th best team in the country, because that group of 5 team is not going to be one of the 12 best teams in the country. But they will be the best team playing in a non-playoff bowl game. They'll be playing in the Citrus Bowl. All right, to welcome into the Voice of College Football, Dave's here. Hello, Dave. Can you hear me?
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
I gotcha. How you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing just fine. It's great to hear from you. It's been a long time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Do you agree the 12 playoff system is the best?
So when there were still 5 conferences, I had an issue with there being 4 teams selected as the top seeds and those 4 receiving byes, and one of the conference champions being left out of the bye scenario. But now that we only have 4 power conferences and all 4 receive byes, you know what? I'm okay with the 12 teams. Absolutely.
Okay. How about the talk with the 16 teams?
16. 16 would be fine. The only issue I would have with 16, the more games we add and the more teams we add, the more we're expecting more and more players to play more games. And it's not a video game. It's guys that we actually have that have flesh and blood are out there playing extra games.
Okay. You mentioned video games with the new NCAA, gaming system coming out. Who should be on the cover?
Who should be on the cover? Well, I was going to say me, but I guess not. I guess that's not where you're headed. Who should be on the cover? Meaning who is the best player, the most deserving player to be on the cover going into this season? Let's put, give me a second here. Let's put, I'll make all of our Michigan fans happy, and we'll put a Michigan player. Let's put Will Johnson on the front of the EA Sports game. How about that?
Oh, no. You got to go back. It's since 2016, 17, whenever, it ended. Nick Saban. How about Nick Saban?
I thought I thought we were talking about the 2025 game, the new one for this season.
Right.
Why are we putting some coach that's a has-been now?
You got to go with the GOAT and some other players. But I think the GOAT has to be on the new the new system.
Dave, you can probably determine how much I really care. So if you want Saban on, great. We'll put Saban on. They should probably run some kind of a big poll and gain some kind of momentum and attention, and run a campaign where they take a poll of college football fans. That's what they should do.
I totally agree. But anyway, my main point was a 12 playoff system. Why don't they, once the first round is over, why don't why don't they reorganize it?
You mean after the first round, reseed the teams?
Reseed. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's a perfect word.
Why? I understand why that's done, because if there are upsets, then sometimes it makes a path much easier for a particular team. So that's why you would do that.
Right. Why don't they reseed it? I mean, they do it in most organized sports. They reseed it.
They do.
Right. So why don't
That's
the
a surprise to me.
football playoff
They,
do that?
they don't reseed the NFL playoffs. They don't reseed the
They
NCAA men's
do.
basketball tournament, do they?
The NFL has reseeded it. Yes.
Wonder when they started that. It's not been that long ago.
Right, but the NFL reseeds it. Why don't the NCAA do so?
Well, we don't know that they won't. They've only had a 14 playoff.
Yeah, but they said they would not. Like if Liberty won a game, and then where would they go? And then I was saying that's the reason for my call was why don't they reseed the NCAA playoffs?
According to what I'm looking at here, the NFL is the only major American sports that reseed the playoffs.
Right.
And I don't even know when that started. It's been fairly recently.
But they do.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I understand why that's a thing, because you don't want to create a situation where one bracket is chalk and the best teams have advanced, and another bracket, let's say the two lowest seeds win the games, and then it creates an easy path. But that's part of playing in a tournament. If those teams won the games, then they're not necessarily the worst teams. If they proved on the field that they were better on that given day.
But it would be easy for an NCAA with a 12-team playoff to reseed, right?
Sure, it would be. It would be
But
easy.
why didn't they decide that? I mean, I, it's going to be an issue later, sooner than later.
Why is it going to be an issue?
Yes. Because if it would be, like you said, easier path. If a top team loses, Liberty plays Alabama, it's going to be an outcry.
I don't know why there would be an outcry, because tournaments, that's the way they're set up. And
Uh,
I get your point, but it just, I don't have an issue with not reseeding.
I do. I mean, they do it in the NFL, and that's where the NCAA is at.
Yeah, well, they're doing everything else like the NFL. Maybe they'll fall in line and start to reseed at some point.
Okay, Mark. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dave.
Good night, sir.
Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Good night, sir.
Our guy Dave showing up. I did not. I'm sure I had heard that at some point about the NFL reseeding playoffs. I don't know when that started. I was trying to look that up to see when it was. Probably when they went to the 7 teams in each conference, which was only in 2020, I think. So they haven't done it for very long in the NFL. All right. Ralph wants to drive up sales on the EA Sports game. Thanks, Ralph. Appreciate it. All right, folks, we wanted to jump on here. I was going to produce a video. Then I thought, you know what? I want to talk to somebody. I don't want to just talk to a camera. So I would like to talk to somebody. We've got Draft Scout Mark. The number one example of a major college football quarterback bust is Shea Patterson. Shea Patterson is the number one example. I was going to mention this to David Greenshield when he called tonight. There was a very interesting 5 minutes that I caught on Twitter today where I believe Shannon Sharp, I don't even know exactly who was doing the interview because I didn't hear them make any statements, ask any questions, because it was basically Johnny Manziel for 5 minutes just talking about what a lousy teammate he was, how he completely wasted his career, how he wasted his last season at Texas A&M, that he would so much love to be able to go back and play one more college season, that he wasted it, that team could have won an SEC championship, maybe a national championship. They lost 4 games because he screwed around, although he had a great season. So I don't know exactly where he really could justify that statement. But it was a very heartfelt apology to former teammates, mostly in the NFL, to say, look at Joe Thomas is one of the greatest players in the history of the NFL. And he played his last 2 years with me, and he needed a decent quarterback to get him somewhere. And he talked about how the Cleveland Browns in particular surrounded him with a really good team and surrounded him with all the resources and everything that he needed to succeed, and gave him all the help and the support to succeed. And he just was too lame brain, immature, selfish, petty, all of those things. And he was very upfront about that. Roger Dodger says the Manziel interview was 2 hours and 12 minutes. Well, I watched 5 minutes. I don't know if I could invest 2 hours of my life into Johnny Manziel, but I was extremely impressed because I got to say, I was feeling for the guy when he was basically saying, I think about this every day. I don't know when I'm really going to be able to get away from that feeling that I let all these people down, that I ruined their careers or hurt their careers or let down the city of Cleveland, let down my teammates, left down. I just, I felt for the guy and thought, I respect him apologizing, him being a big enough man to do that now. And we're not talking about a guy that's doing this at the age of 60. He's doing this in his early 30s, looking back 10 years. But what good does it do at this point? So my thought is, get that out of your system. And I am no psychiatrist or psychologist that could tell you how to do it. Well, I would have some spiritual thoughts concerning how he could do that. But that aside, I hope that he has had those conversations in person with those people that he has let down, that he has offended, that he feels guilty about. Then if they are doing the right thing on the other side and forgiving him, then he can take those first few steps to just let that go, because he can't change the past. We all of us, I'm sure, would love to change certain things in the past, but you can't change anything in the past. So you can only feel so bad for so long to where it becomes counterproductive. Part of that's healthy, to feel guilty, to feel regret, to feel remorse, to be repentant, all those things, completely healthy for him to feel that, process it, go to all the people that he let down, that he needs forgiveness from, to get that done. But I hope that once that's done, then he can let it go and live his life. He's in his early 30s, and it's doing absolutely no one any good, including himself, to hang on to that. So I hope that he's not just hanging on to that, but it certainly sounds like he is. And I think some people that have those kind of regrets in life, they feel as though it's making them a better person to hang on to it. because they deserve to be guilty. They deserve to feel like that. So they should just hang on to it, when that's not the case. You're not doing anyone any good. All right. That's my psychology angle for tonight's show. But yeah, that was tough to listen to, but I was highly impressed with Johnny Manziel, and that he has come to grips with some of his sins of the past, let's say. Yes, Draft Scout is telling us that he's got a bar at Texas A&M, Mark. He's good. I certainly hope that's a joke. Kevin's saying it helps to be rich, too. Actually, it doesn't. Again, I think the point is being lost on some people here. It does not help. Uncle Rico says he's in recovery. Okay, so alcoholic in recovery. Got it. Okay. So that's part of the process as well. Again, this is one of the better things that I've seen outside of certain other areas of topics that I like to watch. But in a sports sense, this is one of the best things that I've seen in a long time. And again, I feel for him, and I hope he's able to get past that and let it go. I just felt bad when I got done watching this. I felt good that he's grown up and come to grips with how he acted like a complete ass and a complete moron and a jerk. So it's great that he's realized that. Yeah, he's going to have to get past that. Michael, Mark took calls, but we are done taking calls. Michael, hopefully we can catch you sometime very soon. Sandra says Johnny Manziel wanted to come to Texas. Mac Brown offered him as a DB. Yes, so hopefully that doesn't speak to Mac Brown's overall scouting prowess. I was certainly interested in Mac Brown's coming back to North Carolina, and I was impressed with his first couple seasons because he instantly elevated that program. But I got to say, and my coaches' rankings are coming out soon, that Mac Brown is no longer impressing me, or hopefully not anyone else, because he's just not doing anything with that program. It's a marginal program. All right, folks, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football and for hanging out late night with us. Our next show is when we've made it through all our team shows for the week. We've got our Clemson Tigers show coming up on Thursday night with Jordan Bowman and Tiger Paw Craven over on the Clemson channel at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And who knows when I will show up next. All right. Appreciate you being here. Ryan, Dave, John, Uncle Rico. We've got Michael here. Sandra, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you, Draft Scout, Ralph, and others. And we will catch you next time.